When I was little, I was scared of the ocean. And I don't just mean the water itself, I was practically terrified of whales, fish, and the drop-off. This is when I was pretty little. I had no problem with anywhere I could see the bottom, but as soon as I passed the drop-off, I was terrified. I don't know if it was not knowing what was under me or just how deep it was in general, but to see me on a paddleboard past the drop would be almost out of the question. For as long as I can remember, I have spent my summers at my cabin on Thormanby Island. Me being a swimmer, and as some would say a fish, I would spend hours swimming and jumping off nearly anything I could find into the water, as long as it was not over the drop-off. It wasn't until I was about 7 years old when I finally mostly got over my fear. It was a hot summer's day, and some of my friends and I were messing around playing in the shallow waters of the low tide. It was then that one of them decided we were going to swim over the drop. As the confident swimmers we were, we put on our goggles and wetsuits and began. We slowly waded out until we were about at the depth of our chests, then realized the drop was right in front of us. Of course, everyone noticed that but me. They all stopped, but not realizing where I was, I kicked my feet off the ground and began to swim. And that's how it all started. I spent the rest of that summer and the many more to come practically living in the water. From cliff jumping to wakeboarding to water skiing, snorkeling, and boating, there is no stopping me. And that's how my love for the ocean has brought me here today. My name is Leila Nabavi, and welcome to my Masterworks presentation, The Story of Howe Sound, how we can help to maintain and restore a healthy and diverse marine ecosystem in Howe Sound. Before I begin to talk about the past of Howe Sound and the damage that was done, I'll set the scene and give you a little introduction. Howe Sound is an inlet of the Salish Sea. It is a spectacular island-filled fjord, currently home to multiple First Nation groups, including the Squamish Nation. According to archaeological evidence, it has been inhabited by indigenous peoples for at least 9,800 years. Despite everything, the land and islands are still used by Squamish and other First Nation groups for cultural practices today. A quote from Where Rivers, Mountains, and People Meet says that for the Squamish Nation, geography is at the start of everything. We are not exaggerating when we say that the mountains, rivers, lakes, and ocean have shaped our histories, customs, arts, and artisanship. Indeed, the landscape of Southwest BC has shaped who we are and the way we live. Despite its proximity to Vancouver, the largest city in BC, Howe Sound is teeming with life. From seals, whales, seabirds, and dolphins, to less visible but equally fascinating cloud sponge reefs, herring gulls, and humongous plankton populations, and more. Unfortunately, up until the last decade, for about 100 years, Howe Sound was the base of massive economic and industrial development and resource exploitation. In the last century, Howe Sound witnessed rapid industrial development, pollution, and significant environmental degradation. A quote from Bob Turner. Using Howe Sound's natural resources has resulted in economic growth, which has had a positive impact on the overall everyday life of people living near the area, but has had a massive negative impact on the health of the ecosystem. Glaciers, earthquakes, volcanoes, and mountain building from a past geological era made Howe Sound one of the most diverse ecosystems in BC, but industrial development has had a serious impact on Howe Sound's integrity. Between 1904 and 1974, Britannia Mines was one of the largest copper mines in the world, and over its 70 years of operation, it was home to over 60,000 people from over 50 different countries. Since it was such a huge production, it created a lot of waste, and became one of the most toxic and messy problems polluting Howe Sound. But this was only half the battle. 2 pulp mills, the wood fiber mill, and the Howe Sound pulp and paper mill at Port Millen, and Nexon, the former chloro-alkali plant in Squamish, BC, all of which operated in Howe Sound for many years, added to the messes from Britannia Mines. Other daily activities like boating, whale watching, and forest activities, and recreational activities also had an impact on the environment and still do today. A lot of waste was created from these huge productions, polluting Howe Sound, destroying the marine ecosystem, and killing thousands of living creatures. As a result of all the toxic effluent that was released into Howe Sound through industrial development, all cetaceans, which are the whale family, disappeared from Howe Sound for almost 10 years, and there was a major reduction in phytoplankton in the 1990s. The waste from these productions destroyed the homes and habitats of many organisms, which had a domino effect on the entire ecosystem. Due to the dramatic reduction in phytoplankton production, ecosystems were impacted at every level. The chemical and mercury contamination from burning fossil fuels and the Nexen chemical plant resulted in the closure of commercial and recreational fishing in Howe Sound in 1971. Although Britannia mines closed in the 70s, it was not until the late 1980s when fish began to return to Howe Sound, and Howe Sound was reopened for recreational fishing. Other things impacted by the industrial development in Howe Sound were prawn fishing, crabbing, salmon in smaller streams, and herring that once spawned in huge schools which had all but disappeared. Although things were looking bad at this time, people started to recognize the devastation that was occurring and began to act. The first bit of hope came in 1988 when Howe Sound Pulp and Paper began a $1.3 billion renewal process. The goal of this project was to raise awareness and help recognize what was an environmental disaster and turn the mill into one of the cleanest in the world. Later, in 2004, the provincial government decided to join the fight and built a water treatment plant at the old Britannia mine site. Not long after that, a $15 million facility was filtering out sulfide-bearing heavy metals and pumping clean water into Britannia Creek, which flowed into Howe Sound. In 2006, the Squamish Streamkeeper Society, a nonprofit group of volunteers, began working with Squamish Terminals, a large ship terminal in Squamish, BC, to help protect herring eggs. The wood pilings at the terminal had been covered in creosote, a tar-like substance which was toxic to the herring eggs. The herring had been laying their eggs on the toxin, which was killing them, lowering the numbers of herring significantly. The solution was to wrap protective coverings on the pilings, allowing the herring to safely lay their eggs, helping the herring to return to Howe Sound, which you can see in this image. Since Britannia Mines, Nexen, and one of the pulp mills operating in Howe Sound shut down, there have been many recovery projects and efforts to help restore the health of the ecosystem. Life has finally started to return to Howe Sound, and the overall health of the ecosystem is beginning to improve. Thanks to a dedicated community and huge cleanup efforts, we've started to see improvements in the health of the ecosystem, and marine wildlife have started to return. Sharon Bodie, North Vancouver resident, says, "In all my years of visiting Howe Sound, never have I seen so much wildlife. All kinds of it, splashing about. It's been quite remarkable." So, scientists have been keeping a close eye on Howe Sound's ecology and wildlife, and can confirm pollution levels are the lowest they've been in decades, and marine wildlife populations are at possibly the highest in years. Scientists have confirmed that Howe Sound is healthier now than it has been in the past 100 years. Although the overall health of Howe Sound ecosystem has improved, there is still more that can be done. Habitat loss from industrialization is still a problem, and these sensitive habitats are still unprotected. In addition, growth in population, commercial and residential development, and tourism have a large impact on the environment. These popular activities rely on a healthy environment and are at risk due to rapid industrial development. Not only that, there is very limited enforcement of regulations, which means that these regulations are less effective at achieving conservation. These habitats and ecosystems are so sensitive that they also have many natural threats such as flooding and drought. Because the ecosystems of Howe Sound are so sensitive, it is important that we ensure their protection. To do this, we must have a better understanding about how the organisms within each ecosystem interact to form a healthy ecosystem. There are many different ecosystem structures in Howe Sound, which involve organisms ranging in size from microscopic to some of the largest in the sea. Although all ecosystems are equally important, a more prominent one is the link between microorganisms and cetaceans, and every organism in between. This food web is a simplified version of how some of the main species in Howe Sound depend on each other. From phytoplankton to humpback whales, every species relies on another to survive. Plankton make up the base of the food web and are the primary producers of food in the ocean. There are microalgae that can be separated into two categories. There are phytoplankton, a marine algae known as the grass of the sea, and zooplankton, known as the animals of the sea. Phytoplankton feeds zooplankton, small forage fish, shrimp, and many more creatures as well. The zooplankton then feed jellyfish, salmon, forage fish, humpback whales, shrimp, and many other species of fish. All of these species then go on to feed others, moving up the food chain, ending in humpback and killer whales. Phytoplankton bloom each year during the spring. When plankton bloom, they increase their biomass. They only bloom in the specific conditions which occur in the spring when nutrients in the waters are high and there is good light and little wind. Timing of the spring bloom in Howe Sound varies from year to year between April and early May. If the timing of the phytoplankton bloom is altered because the conditions are not correct, it could impact the growth and survival of the zooplankton. Plankton help the ecosystem in many ways. Other than supplying food for many creatures, they reduce the atmospheric carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Plankton use carbon dioxide, nutrients, and sunlight to produce organic carbon, which in turn supplies nutrients for other species in the food chain. Without plankton, the whole food web would collapse. Forage fish would disappear from lack of food, affecting the rest of the food chain as well. This leads me to forage fish, which are another main species in the food web. Forage fish are small swimming fish that play an important part of the food web. The main species of forage fish in Howe Sound include herring, anchovy, Pacific sandlance, and surf smelt. Forage fish spawn early in the year, recorded as early as January 9th, and continue to spawn multiple times throughout the year. Like many other species in Howe Sound, the health of these vulnerable fish was threatened due to industrialization. Forage fish were less abundant in Howe Sound in the early 1940s until 1960, when they began to return, marking their full return in 1971. From 2015 to 2019, there were more recorded anchovies in the Howe Sound than at any time during the peak of the industrialization. There is much excitement over the return of forage fish because the status of forage fish populations can be an indicator of the health and productivity of nearshore systems in our marine environment. Forage fish provide an abundance of food for many species higher in the food chain. Some of the main marine animals fed by forage fish include salmon, marine birds, seals, sea lions, porpoises, and humpback whales. This allows for the populations of these organisms to grow. Consistent with their status as a keystone species, the salmon, fed by forage fish, are another group important to the Howe Sound ecosystem. As a keystone species, salmon are relied upon heavily by other species, and their population health can therefore influence ecosystems dramatically. Unsurprisingly, during the time of mass industrial development, the health of the salmon was dramatically impacted. This had a lasting effect on the environment of Howe Sound. Salmon are important to Howe Sound in many ways. Salmon provide us with many ecosystem services, such as food, and help make the ecosystem of Howe Sound more diverse. Since there has been a return in herring and other small forage fish, we have seen an increased amount of humpback and killer whales. This is because herring are the main food sources for salmon, and salmon provide food for for killer whales. Being a keystone species, salmon are fed on no matter what part of their life cycle they are in. Salmon eggs are fed on by trout and many types of ducks and birds during spawning season. The following spring, juvenile salmon feed marine fish, seals, and sea lions. As they return to Howe Sound through the Salish Sea, resident killer whales, the less common killer whales in Howe Sound, feed on adult Chinook. Later in their lifetime, spawning salmon and their carcasses provide food sources for eagles, gulls, and bears, and the nutrients from salmon carcasses provide fertilization for streamside vegetation. All of these are reasons that salmon are a keystone species. When salmon populations were affected from industrial activities, it had a lasting effect on the rest of the ecosystem as well. Salmon were no longer able to provide sufficient food for resident killer whales, seals, sea lions, or lingcod. The populations of seals and sea lions then varied, impacting the transient killer whales as they then had a lack of food. Finally, I will talk about the cetaceans, a group of aquatic mammals consisting of around 79 living species, many of which are endangered. In Howe Sound, the main cetaceans are the killer whale, the humpback whale, porpoises, and sometimes dolphins. The main food sources for humpback and killer whales, or humpback whales in Howe Sound, are forage fish and zooplankton. Due to a recent return of these species since the 1900s, there has also been a return of humpback whales. The main food source for porpoises is Pacific hake, squid, and forage fish. Porpoises are important in Howe Sound as they are one of the 3 species that feed the transient killer whales. In Howe Sound, there are 2 different types of killer whales, known as transient and resident. Transient killer whales make up 95% of all killer whales visiting Howe Sound. This is because their preferred food source is seals, porpoises, and sea lions. Resident killer whales prefer salmon, which is less abundant in Howe Sound, making transient killer whales more common. Now, hearing the familiar swoosh of a whale's blow is becoming a normal occurrence again when paddling through, walking along, or wading in the waters of Howe Sound. However, it has not always been this way. Around 2010, the number of cetacean sightings in Howe Sound showed a dramatic increase, shown in this graph. And the annual number of sightings have remained high since then. Although it is hard to determine exactly why the cetaceans have returned, it is likely that it is due to the return of their food source, forage fish, salmon, seals, and sea lions, which in turn is due to less pollution. Like the rest of Howe Sound, cetaceans were also impacted strongly by Britannia mines and the port mill and pulp mill and other industrial activities, as you can see again based on this graph. Cetaceans were particularly impacted by sound pollution. Killer whales and humpback whales use echolocation to communicate with each other and catch food in dark or murky waters when visibility is low. Sound pollution from boats and ships coming too close to whales damages their echolocation, making it hard for them to find food and communicate with each other. Young cetaceans can be separated this way from their parents, causing them to die at younger ages than normal. Many of you may be surprised to learn that over 100 years ago, Howe Sound in the Strait of Georgia was the seasonal home to 100 to 150 humpback whales, many of which fed around Bowen Island. Around that time, the Cates family ran whale watching trips regularly around Howe Sound to see the amazing humpback whales and killer whales breaching. Sadly, around 1910, 3 years after the Pacific Whaling Company began operating out of Howe Sound and Nanaimo, over 140 humpback whales were killed. All of these activities combined are likely responsible for keeping the cetaceans away from Howe Sound for most of the 1900s. The loss of cetaceans had many far-reaching effects on the ecosystem. Not enough food meant not enough cetaceans, and therefore not enough large top-of-the-food chain mammals. This resulted in a top-down domino effect, impacting the rest of the ecosystem by causing population increases in cetacean prey species. Uncontrolled cetacean prey species feed too heavily on their own prey, reducing these food sources for other creatures reliant on the same species. Although it may seem like the cetaceans have fully bounced back, this is far from the case. 12 of BC's 25 species of cetaceans are listed at risk under Canada's Species at Risk Act. This goes for the rest of the ecosystem as well. If similar human activities occur as they have in the past, the Howe Sound ecosystem will once again be threatened. In the future, we must continue to work to establish and preserve a healthy and balanced marine ecosystem in Howe Sound. All creatures depend on one another, and the loss of one will impact the rest, potentially even leading to an ecosystem collapse. Just because the ecosystem was damaged in the past and has begun to recover does not stop future damage from occurring. There are still many current and emerging threats to Howe Sound that must be addressed to ensure a healthy ecosystem in the future. A large threat to ecosystems around the world is climate change. Increasing CO2 levels that cause ocean acidification and warming surface waters makes it harder for plankton to strive, having a ripple effect on the rest of the ecosystem, as I previously talked about. Obviously, the images in the slide are not from Howe Sound, but the effect climate change is having on the ecosystems shown will be similar. Proposals for new developments could also damage estuary life and threaten plankton production if proposed activities reduce light penetration. Ocean pollution from plastics and other garbages are also very bad for the ecosystem. Small fish and marine creatures can think these plastics are food, and when they eat them, it harms their digestive systems and can cause them to die. Additionally, bottles or six-pack rings can get stuck around animals' necks, blocking them from breathing, or larger fish or cetaceans can get caught in fishing nets and lines. If in the future we become careless and do not take the time to look after Howe Sound, not only the ecosystem will be impacted. It may not be obvious, but Howe Sound is used in so many ways not realized by people on the West Coast and in the Vancouver area. Raise your hand if you like to eat fish. How about crabs? Prawns? As shown in the figure to my right, we depend upon vegetation to clean the air we breathe. We depend upon healthy soils and oceans to grow the food that nourishes us, and clean water to hydrate us and maintain healthy functioning in our bodies. As social beings, we depend upon minerals and raw materials to fuel our economies, and it is in nature that our culture finds its roots and sense of place. A quote from Michelle M. from the David Suzuki Foundation. A study by the David Suzuki Foundation showed that Howe Sound offers about $800 million to $4.7 billion per year in ecosystem services. Some of these services include breathable air, drinkable water, nourishing food, stable climate, protection from natural disasters, and a place to relax on vacation. The benefits Howe Sound provides to humans is unbelievable. Imagine if we didn't have those benefits. That could be up to $4.7 billion from ecosystem services down the drain. As Howe Sound waters and beaches are used for transportation, entertainment, and sightseeing, these activities will be less enjoyable and less frequent without the biodiversity we get to observe today. That's not even to mention how much our everyday lives would change. A quote from Paul Watson says, "If we wipe out the fish, the oceans are going to die. If the oceans die, we die." Local residents of Bowen would no longer be able to swim in the clear blue waters of the Bowen beaches. Our grocery stores would have very limited amounts of seafood. Then think about all the possible impacts of global warming on a much smaller scale, on a scale where your everyday life would be different. If we do not continue to try and protect Howe Sound and its ecosystem, life will no longer thrive in the ocean and it will return to its degraded state of the 1900s. We must take the time to protect Howe Sound so we don't let it slip away. There are many things that can be done to help make and keep Howe Sound healthy, but first let's talk about some things the government can do to help. As the government plays a key role in decision making around the distribution of funding, there are many things the government can do. Aside from helping support the community in reducing climate change, there are some more simple things the government can do. As there's so much we do not know about the ecosystem, it is important to conduct proper scientific studies. Many surveys of populations of species in Howe Sound are outdated, and the government can play a key role in funding new surveys to help us learn more about our current ecosystem. Other things that can be done by the government on a more broad scale are creating and enforcing fishing and crapping regulations, not supporting commercial fishing, adding and creating more conservation and protected areas, legislating against the production and use of harmful chemicals and single-use plastics, and help increase public education about Howe Sound and how individuals can help. But getting help from the government is just half the battle. An important part of helping to restore and maintain Howe Sound's natural beauty comes from you. Let's take a look at how we can do this. Some simple things you can do with your family are: mind your carbon footprint and reduce your energy consumption. Eat sustainable seafood. Use fewer plastic products, such as reusable containers instead of Ziplocs. Help take care of your beach by not littering and picking up garbage where you see it. Not purchasing items that may harm sea life such as sunscreen that is not reef safe. Support and donate to organizations working to protect the ocean. Report if you see any whales with the Whale Report Sightings Network to help give scientists a better idea of the current state of whale populations. Help by making sure your house, school, or work is properly equipped with recycling and compost facilities. Or finally, help by influencing change in your community by simply telling a friend about what you learned today. Even such a small action, like picking up a piece of garbage off the beach, can help keep Howe Sound such an amazing place to live. While Howe Sound may be looking better, it is still recovering from a devastating past. Between 1904 and 1974, a wave of industrial activity took out most of the living life in Howe Sound, and it was not until just recently when things started turning around. Now that Howe Sound is in a delicate phase of recovery, it is more important than ever that we protect it. There are many things that can be done to help, big and small, but in the end, every little action helps in restoring this naturally beautiful place we call home. This project would not have been possible without the support of my family, my internal advisor, and my external advisor. First, I would like to thank my parents for constantly providing me with ideas and helping me through the process. Thank you for always believing in me and always seeming so interested in my Masterworks. I would also like to thank the first person on my advisory committee, my internal advisor, Leila Nabavi. Thank you for always keeping me on track and giving me great suggestions. I honestly could not have done this without you. I'm so glad I got to work with you this year. I'm also extremely grateful for my external advisor, Bob Turner. Thank you so much for helping me decipher my complicated topic and helping me choose the path I want to take, and for taking time out of your busy day to meet with me multiple times. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for coming to my Masterworks presentation.
I'm actually first going to ask questions from Bob Turner, your external advisor, who could not unfortunately be here today, but he sent me along some questions, so I'm going to be reading them as if I am Bob Turner. So hello, Leila. How fitting that you're presenting your excellent research on the marine ecosystem of Howe Sound on the day that we are celebrating World Oceans Day. I so appreciate that you chose to learn about your local ocean, how it works, and how we can protect it. First question. So, as Bob Turner, I'm curious. You started your presentation by telling us how you came to love the ocean. So I wonder now, how has this Masterworks exploration changed your relationship with the ocean, particularly your local ocean of Howe Sound?
Well, I guess learning more about the ocean near my home and like kind of how everything works has kind of made me think about it differently. Like, I don't know, just the other day on the ferry, somebody dropped a piece of garbage or something and it almost flew off the ferry and said, "We don't want to hurt the fish." And then just then I thought about like kind of how everything works and how that could like, in a more broad scale, impact everything. So yeah, I don't know.
Another question. Here's another thing Bob is curious about. You identify many potential actions that people can do to assist Howe Sound. If you were to start an advocacy group to promote one of those actions and solution to it, which issues or solution would you choose? What audience would you focus your message on?
I don't know, I think I'd try to focus on promoting like going vegetarian or vegan or eating like less dairy products and meat because, as I'm sure a lot of you know, that huge, like the production of dairy products and meat has a huge impact on the environment.